My wife started cheating on me, but I received an invitation to a private island, where I found a girl who had been betrayed just like me. It all began when I started questioning the decisions that had led me to this point. My seemingly predictable life crumbled after uncovering my wife's betrayal, and everything spiraled out of control. In search of an escape, I accepted an invitation to stay on a secluded Caribbean island, hoping it would offer me refuge. Little did I know how much this retreat would change my life. Stepping off the plane into the warm, humid air, I felt a fleeting sense of relief from reality. The island was exclusive, luxurious, and surreal, unlike anything I had ever experienced. It felt like a dream, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't truly belong. I needed this break, but I was fully aware it wouldn't last forever. Sitting on the patio of an extravagant villa overlooking the stunning but sweltering island, I felt out of place. This wasn't just any island, it was a private retreat for the ultra-wealthy. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd be here, lounging in the sun with a glass of rum in hand. Sam, a towering man dressed in pristine white, was always nearby, adjusting the parasol or sending Simone to refill my drink without me asking. He seemed to know my preferences better than I did, even ensuring someone applied sunscreen when necessary. Below, I could hear the kids playing in the pool, with Sonia's voice occasionally rising above the noise. The sun deck was larger than any house I'd ever lived in. Sam stood at his usual spot, ready to assist with anything while keeping a watchful eye on the children. I waved to let him know I didn't need anything, and he nodded, informing me that Sonia was on her way up. "Just Sonia," I reminded him. "Yes, sir, Frank," he replied, trying to drop the formalities as I had asked. I had been encouraging the staff to be less formal when we were alone, but old habits die hard. I didn't want my kids growing up thinking they were different from anyone else. I reminded Sam that they deserved respect, and he nodded, though he still addressed me as sir. As Sonia approached, Sam discreetly moved halfway down the stairs, watching the pool without intruding. As she neared, I marveled at her beauty, wondering how long this could last. Sonia, around 35, had a figure that showed no signs of having 3 children, effortlessly wearing a tiny bikini. "How's my lover boy recovering from playing with the kids?" Sonia teased, trying to get a reaction from me. "Exhausted, but not from the kids." "You wore me out after last night," I replied. She giggled. "It was a great night. Made me feel young again. You really put me through my paces." "I don't know how Seymour had any energy left for Jean," I joked. "Jean liked Zach, but she wasn't wild about it. One climax was enough for her," she added. "Sounds like some guys I knew in college." Sonia grinned. "But enough about Jean. I sensed something was bothering you at breakfast." "What's wrong?" I hesitated but realized we needed to talk honestly. "Sonia, I can't help but wonder when this bubble is going to burst." "What bubble?" she asked, concerned. "All of this. You're a beautiful 35-year-old with wealth and luxury. Last night those rich guys were all after you." "Yeah, but they didn't get anywhere, did they? They just want to get in my pants," she interrupted with a grin. "I can't blame them. You're stunning, especially in that bikini or that dress from last night." "So, you're jealous," Sonia teased. "Don't worry, Frank. No one's getting anything from me while you're around." "That's part of the problem, Sonia. You're amazing, and I'm just a 43-year-old truck driver. What did I do to deserve this? You married a woman who let my husband sleep with her, and you're better in bed than anyone I've been with." She laughed. "Yeah, but this was supposed to be about getting back at our exes. I never expected it to turn into this." "Hold on, Frank," Sonia interrupted, her tone serious. "You haven't taken advantage of me. I chose to seduce you. And this house? It wasn't from Seymour, it's been in my family for years, just like the others. Sorry, I didn't realize. But we come from different worlds, Sonia. I love it here and so do my girls. But the longer we stay, the harder it'll be to go back to normal." "What do you mean by back to normal?" she demanded. "Sonia, I've grown to care for you more than I should. But eventually you'll want to get back to your old life and leave me behind." "Jesus, Frank, what kind of shallow person do you think I am?" she shot back. "I don't think you're shallow, and I'd punch anyone who says otherwise," I assured her. She laughed. "That was funny. Seymour can't take a punch, can he? One punch and he was out." "He deserved it for his insults at the airport," I replied. "He only spoke the truth. Truth as he saw it. You made him think we came here for revenge when we agreed it was all for show. We never planned to sleep together." "Really? I had my own plans," I confessed. "Look, Frank, when I first approached you, I saw something in you that reminded me of my father. A good man who put others first. You cared more about your daughters than your own anger. And that impressed me," Sonia explained. "It was all about protecting them," I said, remembering the day she walked into that cafe, turning every head. She sat down across from me, asking for privacy to discuss something personal and unpleasant. The guys, having finished their meals, politely left the table as Sonia requested, though they gave me curious looks, and a few even winked. I shrugged, thinking someone might know what was happening. I was wrong. "Mr. Moore, we haven't met, but I'm Sonia Springfield. I believe you've met my husband a few times," she said. I had met him only of the big shots at the company where my wife Jean worked. I never liked the guy, he seemed too full of himself. "Yes, I've seen him at some company events," I replied, feeling uneasy. "I'm here to give you some unfortunate news. I wanted to tell you before it becomes public. Your wife and my husband have been having an affair," she said. "I don't believe you," I responded, shocked. "Jean loved our kids, our home, and me, or so she always said. But the thought nagged at me, and I couldn't completely dismiss it. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, but it's true," Sonia said, placing a manila envelope on the table. "There are photos in here, but I warn you, some are disturbing." With reluctance, I peeked inside the envelope. The first image I saw was of a very unclothed Jean with another man, definitely not me. My shock and anger must have shown on my face. "I wanted you to know before tomorrow, when it will be all over the media. Seymour is well known, and am filing for divorce. You might want to shield your children from the news tomorrow," she advised. I likely thanked her, though I don't remember exactly what I said. "The man I came with is my lawyer, Ronnie McIntosh. He's good, and if you need legal help, he's available. I've spoken to him, and he can handle your case at a reduced rate since I have him on retainer," Sonia added. My mind was a blur from the anger, though I quickly regained control, a skill I developed as a truck driver on busy roads. "Yeah, divorce seems like the only option," I muttered, still in shock. Ronnie McIntosh then approached. "Don't rush into a divorce. It can be costly. You should talk to your wife first. Maybe see a marriage counselor," he suggested. As he spoke, I continued glancing at the photos without fully pulling them out of the envelope, too overwhelmed to face them head-on. "Let me see," Sonia said, and I tilted the envelope so she could take a look. "Oh my, that's from last Thursday in your house. Seymour is with your wife while your kids are on the sofa watching TV. They didn't seem aware of what was happening, though," she explained. "Are you telling me my wife was doing this while my kids were in the same room?" I shouted, losing my temper again. "Yes, but it looks like the kids were oblivious, completely focused on the TV," she replied. "Jesus Christ, my wife was doing that with my kids right there," I yelled, drawing attention from everyone in the cafe. "I guess marriage counseling is off the table then," Ronnie McIntosh, her lawyer, interjected while scribbling on some forms. "Absolutely, and I want custody of my kids," I responded firmly. "That video will help with that. It's clear evidence of child endangerment, and the courts will look kindly on it," Ronnie said. "Sign here, and we can start the process." "Do it. I want my girls away from her influence as soon as possible." "But I'm worried about how this divorce will affect them," I admitted. Ronnie suggested getting a social worker involved to suspend Jean's parental rights temporarily, but Sonia cautioned against involving social services, saying it might make things more complicated and harder to control. Ronnie asked if he could call me Frank, and I agreed. He then suggested I avoid going home that night to keep my temper in check and give them time to prepare. I agreed, planning to tell Jean I had car trouble to delay my return. Ronnie assured me that Sonia was handling Seymour, and that the divorce papers would be served the next morning. He advised me to pick up my daughters and have them stay with my sister for a few days to keep them away from the situation. I agreed, bitterly recalling that my sister had kept the girls during our second honeymoon. Ronnie assured me that everything was in place to confront Jean without the children around. He warned me that if Jean resisted, they would use the video evidence to push for social services to take the kids away permanently. I was shocked when Ronnie confirmed that the courts could take such drastic action, but he explained that family courts prioritize the protection of children above all else. I signed the necessary papers, determined not to let Jean take my daughters from me. Sonia, who had been looking at a picture of my girls, sympathized, mentioning her own 3 children and the impact Seymour's affair had on them. We talked about how people don't consider the consequences of their actions on their children when they have affairs. Sonia reassured me that she understood what I was going through and that we would likely meet again. After they left, I called my boss to take time off and informed Jean that I wouldn't be home that night. The call went too smoothly, almost like she didn't care. Speaking to my daughters without getting emotional was difficult. Friday didn't go as planned. I picked up my daughters and took them to my sister's house, where she was ready to support me through the divorce. When I returned home, Rachel, a divorce lawyer from Ronnie's office, was there to help. She informed me that Jean had already been served with the papers and seemed unfazed, while Seymour looked less confident. Rachel suspected that Jean and Seymour had been planning to leave us, and that Jean's comment about moving the schedule up hinted at their plan. She also took precautions by placing microphones around the house to record any conversations, suspecting that John might try to accuse me of misuse. When Jean and Seymour showed up with their lawyer, Henry Harcourt, tensions rose. Rachel handled the situation firmly, stating that the evidence would be used in the custody case, not the divorce. Jean was visibly angry but eventually agreed to watch the video Rachel had prepared. After watching the video, Harcourt realized how damaging it would be for Jean in family court. Rachel then laid out our terms. Jean would move out immediately, wed file for divorce on irreconcilable differences, and Jean would have supervised visitation with the girls. Though Jean was upset, she eventually agreed, knowing the evidence was too strong against her. The divorce process continued quietly, though Jean wasn't happy about paying child support. Despite everything, I never spoke badly about Jean in front of the girls, not wanting to alienate them from their mother. Rachel and her husband became close family friends, often visiting and helping with the girls. They even took the girls out occasionally, which gave me some much-needed breaks. Over time, the girls made new friends, though I didn't pay much attention to who they were. On Cheryl's 10th birthday, Jean showed up with her new partner John, creating a tense atmosphere. Later, Rachel and her husband arrived with 2 children and Sonia, who seemed oddly familiar to Seymour. As Jean and Seymour were leaving, one of the girls with Rachel waved and called out, "Hi, Daddy," revealing that Sonia and Seymour had a more complicated connection than I had realized. "I think I got the better deal," Sonia called out. I figured she meant ditching her husband. Jean looked furious as she slammed the car door and said something to Seymour, who waved to his kids before driving off, looking confused. "Sorry, I hoped they'd be gone before we arrived," Rachel said at the door. Sonia's been wanting to talk, and Susan and I thought having her kids at Cheryl's party would be good since they get along well. I gave Rachel a questioning look, but before I could respond, Sonia asked, "Hi, Frank, can we join the party?" Susan then rushed out, hugged Sonia, and brought everyone inside. Later, Susan explained, Cheryl needed other kids at her party. She's still hesitant to bring school friends home with everything going on. We thought Sonia's kids being in a similar situation would be good company for her. Cheryl quickly bonded with Sonia's son Dominic, nicknamed Tadpole, and the other kids got along well too, turning the party into a real celebration. Rachel and her husband organized games, clearly enjoying being around the kids, especially since they hadn't had any of their own. While I was outside for a smoke, Sonia approached me. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Managing. How about you?" I replied. "Not much different." Seymour was rarely home, always chasing deal source, so he said. I should have known better. "You suspected something?" I asked. I was foolish to believe him for so long. Seymour's charming, but I should have questioned his true feelings. My father never trusted him, and now I'm glad he protected my inheritance. I feel sorry for your wife. She doesn't know what she's in for. Well, I don't. She deserves what she gets after what she did to me and the girls. Seymour can be very persuasive. Your wife probably didn't see it coming, but she will eventually. She's good at her job, though. Is she? Or did she get there because of her connection to Seymour? No, I think it's the opposite. Jean's talented and holds influence in her company. Seymour likely saw that and latched on for his own gain. I wasn't sure how to respond, realizing I didn't know much about Jean's work. Maybe that had been part of the problem. Sonia continued, Seymour will do anything to get ahead, which is likely why he married me, because of my father's connections. But after my father retired and secured my inheritance, I became less useful to him. I probably offered my condolences for her father's passing, and the conversation shifted to our families and hopes for our kids. My disappointment in Jean's betrayal crept in, and Sonia shared that she was a stay-at-home mom. She smiled when I mentioned the challenges of raising 3 kids and managing a household. Sonia was still smiling when Susan found us and said Tadpole was looking for his mother. Tadpole then asked if Cheryl and Annette could come over the next day so he could teach Cheryl how to dive. I suspected he just wanted to show off, but I agreed. Sonia invited Susan and her kids to join them for lunch, offering a day by the pool. The next morning, I found myself driving my 2 kids and Susan's eldest, following John, who had directions to Sonia's house, with Susan and her other 3 kids in his car. We wound through the countryside's lanes. It was sunny but not warm, and I mentioned the cool temperature to Susan. She assured me the pool must be heated since Sonia had invited the kids for a swim. Just as I started to think John was lost, he turned into the drive of a massive country house. I expected a large house with a pool, but nothing like this. There was even a gatehouse at the entrance. I wasn't sure we were in the right place until Tadpole and the twins ran out to greet us. The kids rushed into the mansion, and Sonia appeared, looking effortlessly elegant in cut-off jeans and a blouse. She led us through the house to a large conservatory, now an indoor pool, where 3 young people were swimming college students who helped with the kids on weekends, as she explained. After introductions, our kids returned, changed, and ready for the pool. During the day, I noticed the boy, Jeremy, sizing me up, and the 2 girls chatting with me briefly before whispering among themselves. Nothing significant happened, except that all the adults, including me, eventually donned swimsuits. Sonia had a stash for guests. One thing stood out: John couldn't take his eyes off Susan in her suit. Whatever she wore must have worked, because she called me the next day to say John proposed to her that night. John was a good guy, and I could tell he was thoughtful when he traded his BMW for a family-friendly vehicle to accommodate Susan and the kids. After that day, visiting Sonia's house became a regular weekend event. Saturdays were usually spent at my house, and Sundays at hers, with John, Susan, and their kids often joining us. Over time, I met some of Sonia's relatives, including Uncle Theo, who loved clay pigeon shooting, and Aunt Gilda, a formidable woman who reminded me of Lady Bracknell from The Importance of Being Earnest. Gilda was terrifying to most adults, but was kind and influential with the kids, especially my daughters, who suddenly became more diligent with chores and homework after talking with her. One evening, Rachel handed me an envelope as I opened the door. "All signed and sealed," she said, smiling. "The judge added one order: Jean gets 65 visits a year, supervised, and Seymour can't be present, even if they marry." "So it's done. We're divorced?" I asked. "Yes, almost. The paperwork still needs to be finalized, but you're free. Jean has to pay child support monthly, or the court will step in," Rachel replied. "Thanks, Rachel. I guess I'll be seeing your bill soon," I said. "No, Jean's paying that too. The judge saw your income compared to hers and decided she should cover your legal expenses. He also agreed you could have asked for spousal support until the girls are grown, but you chose not to. Thanks, Rachel. I'm not broke, but I'll need to budget carefully." Rachel scolded me for not taking more from Jean. "Your pride got in the way of common sense. Jean would have taken you for everything," she said. "Maybe, but I'm not like Jean. I don't cheat, and I don't use money or kids as weapons." "I doubt she'll ever realize what she lost," Rachel remarked. "Jean always wanted a big fish with money. I'm content in my little pond, and I need to find someone who will be happy to share it with me." "What makes you say that, Frank?" "Oh, just little things, like how she envied people with newer cars and bigger houses. Well, she's got her big fish now. I just wonder if her net's strong enough to keep him." Rachel grinned. And I wondered how long Jean and Seymour's relationship would last. From what Sonia hinted, Seymour had likely cheated before, and there's that saying, once a cheat, always a cheat. The next weekend, Susan and John announced their wedding date. Although they'd only known each other a short time, John turned out to be a great husband and father figure to Susan's kids, who hadn't seen their real dad in years. A week later, Sonia asked Susan about honeymoon plans. "Honeymoon with the kids? Who'd watch them?" Susan replied. Sonia suggested they stay at her villa in the Caribbean. She even invited me and my girls, offering privacy for Susan and John in the guest house. Soon the kids overheard and got excited, making it hard to say no despite the potential cost. I later vented to Sonia, "I'm sorry, Frank, I got carried away. I just wanted to give Susan and John something special. Don't worry about the flights, I get a huge discount." "I don't know, Sonia," I started to protest. "Frank, this isn't about pride. Plus, I had an ulterior motive. Tadpole's become very fond of Cheryl, and he was planning to stay with Aunt Gilda unless she joined us." "They're only 10, I said. "Kids grow up fast these days," Sonia replied. "But yes, there's more. I thought it would be amusing if Jean and Seymour thought we were getting closer. We could put on a little show at the airport." "A show?" I asked, surprised by her choice of words. "Yes, let them think we're more than friends. It'll piss them off," Sonia said with a mischievous grin. "Did you just say piss off?" I asked, surprised by her language. "Yes, Frank. I may have gone to a fancy school, but that doesn't mean I can't speak plainly," Sonia giggled. "So, will you go along with my plan or disappoint the kids?" she asked. "You're a wicked woman, Sonia. You made sure Tadpole would hear your invitation, didn't you?" "Yes," she admitted. "But it was his idea to invite you all. He just had his own reasons." "Fine, well go, but let's not overdo it in front of the kids." "Of course," Sonia replied, though her tone hinted at mischief. As weeks passed, I avoided newspapers. which were filled with stories about Sonia and Seymour's legal battles and photos of Jean and Seymour at various clubs. In the few articles I skimmed, Jean was painted as a femme fatale and a homewrecker. Surprisingly, though Sonia and I were occasionally mentioned, there were no salacious hints about us, which I expected but didn't see. Jean began visiting the kids for an hour or so a few evenings a week, with Seymour dropping her off. Conveniently, press photographers seemed to know exactly when she'd be there. Given how she posed for the cameras, I suspected she was tipping them off herself. From the start, I insisted someone else supervise Jean's visits, ensuring she was never alone with the kids. My feelings towards her were still antagonistic, and I knew it showed when we were in the same room. Rachel helped a few times, but then introduced Tracy, a young secretary from her office who took over for a small fee. Tracy's presence proved useful. Jean seemed to think she was just a local teenager and didn't realize Tracy was reporting back to me. Tracy informed me that Jean was asking the kids about our visits to Sonia's house and the relationship between Sonia and me. Annette had simply told her, "We go because Tadpole is Cheryl's boyfriend and Jeremy teaches us to swim," which confused Jean even more since she didn't know who Jeremy was. As time passed, Jean hinted to the kids that she'd be away for a few weeks in the summer. Tracy mentioned Annette almost let slip about our holiday plans, but Cheryl quickly changed the subject to Susan's wedding. One evening, Tracy said, "Frank, I know I'm here to upset your wife. Sorry, ex-wife, but I also know you want the girls to have a reasonable relationship with her." As reasonable as possible under the circumstances, I agreed. Tracy then expressed concern that Cheryl might be harboring even more resentment towards Jean than I realized. She suggested I consider counseling for Cheryl. "Thank you, Tracy." I hadn't noticed, I admitted. Maybe I'm too caught up in my own pain. I thought the girls were handling the breakup well. They are, mostly, but Cheryl seems to blame her mother entirely, which is understandable. But she'll need to forgive her at some point. Taking her advice, I arranged for both Cheryl and Annette to see a counselor during school lunch hours. A week later, the counselor called me in for a discussion. "Both kids have handled the recent chaos at home quite well, Mr. Moore. You're somewhat right about Cheryl's resentment towards her mother, but I'm confident she'll eventually forgive her, even if she won't forget what happened or what she believes could have happened if you hadn't intervened. I just wanted the girls to have a decent relationship with their mother. I think they need her in the long run," I replied. "You hope they wouldn't blame her for the breakup." Well, Cheryl figured out her mom was having an affair long before she left home. She also suspected her mom intended to take her and Annette when she moved in with that man, which has made Cheryl despise him. "She's not alone," I said. "I understand, Mr. Moore. Cheryl struggled with what to do before you found out. She wanted to tell you, but feels guilty for not doing so sooner. That guilt has caused her significant stress, and it impacted her schoolwork badly. Both girls' studies suffered, but about 8 weeks ago, they began to improve." "Aunt Gilda," I said absent-mindedly. "Sorry?" "Oh, we met an older lady about 2 months ago. She spent a lot of time talking with the girls. I noticed they became more diligent with school and more helpful around the house afterward. It sounds like Aunt Gilda has been a positive influence on them." "Yes, she has, surprisingly. She's strict but clearly good with kids. They've only seen her a few times, but she always makes time for them individually. I think she's been a great influence on your girls. Encourage their relationship. But if you don't mind me asking, who is Sonia?" "Cheryl seems quite attached to her as well. That likely has more to do with Tadpole. Sonia is his mother, and Cheryl and Tadpole have become close friends. If they were older, I'd say too close, if you know what I mean. By the way, Sonia is the wife of the man my wife is with now." "Oh, I apologize. Lady Sonia Springfield, of course. I didn't realize your wife's new partner was Seymour Springfield." "Yes, she's with him now," I confirmed. "Yeah, I'm sure you've read about it in the papers like everyone else." "Well, Mr. Moore, Cheryl is more disappointed in her mother than anything. She's attached to you and feels guilty for not sharing her suspicions sooner. She's also grown close to Lady Sonia and her son, and probably blames her mother for breaking up that family too. However, she still loves her mother, and I believe she'll forgive her with time. Annette doesn't seem to have any major issues. She loves her mother and misses her, but she's enjoying the extra time with you. She thinks you're more fun and likes helping you in the kitchen." "Yeah, she's great in the kitchen. Well, you'll continue seeing them every few weeks during the school year. Unless something changes, I don't think you need to worry in the long run. Just give them time to adjust and keep encouraging their mother's visits." That Sunday, Aunt Gilda was at Sonia's house again, and as usual, she spent some time with both of my daughters. I didn't pay much attention since Uncle Theo had taken me outside to teach me how to shoot clays. I'd never handled a weapon before, and I doubt I hit more than one before Dominic called us for lunch. Uncle Theo thought tadpole was a silly name for a young man and refused to use it. I agreed, but I didn't think it was my place to interfere at that time. Uncle Theo was the only person who called Dominic by any other name. After lunch, as I was heading upstairs to change into my swimming trunks, I heard, "Mr. Moore, I'd like a private word with you, please, young man. Join me in the library for a cup of tea." Aunt Gilda's voice boomed from the library as I approached the stairs. I looked at Sonia, who was in the hall, but she seemed as puzzled as I was about what Aunt Gilda wanted to discuss. I must have looked nervous as Sonia altered her path to arrive at the library door with me. "I have some matters to discuss with Frank in private, Sonia. Please ensure we're not disturbed," Aunt Gilda said, dismissing Sonia with a few words. I followed Aunt Gilda into the library, where she pointed me to a chair with a wave of her walking stick. After she sat down, I followed suit. Moments later, one of Sonia's staff brought in a tea tray, which he set on the table between us before leaving with a respectful nod to Aunt Gilda. "Frank, what's this nonsense about you having my girls see a psychiatrist?" she asked, referring to my daughters as her girls, which I took as affectionate. "They've been through a lot, and I was concerned about Cheryl's hostility towards her mother," I replied. I wasn't upset by Aunt Gilda's interference. She clearly cared about the girls and was an intelligent woman. Not surprising, considering her mother's poor choice in Seymour. I've always known he was trouble. But don't worry, Cheryl will get over her anger eventually. Kids are resilient. "That's pretty much what the counselor said," I admitted. "See, if you had asked me first, you could have saved some money," she replied, handing me a cup of tea. Then she gave me one of her intense looks. "Now, what are your intentions toward my niece?" she asked. "Sorry?" "My intentions towards who?" "Sonia, young man. You're here every weekend. I want to know your intentions. She's already made one big mistake, and I don't want her making another. Gilda, I bring the kids over so they can play with Sonia's children. They've all become great friends, especially Cheryl and Dominic. And that's the only reason you visit every Sunday?" "Yes, of course. Both of our kids have lost a parent, and Sonia thought they could support each other. She brings her kids to my house on Saturdays, and I bring mine here on Sundays." Gilda smiled knowingly. "She's becoming more like her mother," she murmured. "Sorry?" I asked, confused. "Oh, nothing important. Now, about this trip to the Villa Sonia's, concerned about whether you can afford the airfare. It's a concern, but I think I can manage. Frank, you and your family have been good for Sonia. She's not as tough as she seems. If you need help with the airfare, just ask. I'm wealthy, love. Sonia's children and yours have captured my heart, too. I don't want them missing out over money. Thank you, Gilda, but ill manage. Well, get by. I wasn't sure if I was annoyed by her offer, but since she cared more about the girls than me, I let it go." We chatted about how well the children were getting along, and then she suggested I return to enjoy the afternoon with them. All the while, Gilda had a knowing smile, one she seemed to reserve just for me. "What was that about?" Sonia asked quietly when I returned to the pool. "I have no idea. I think Aunt Gilda just wanted to talk about my kids," I replied, avoiding mentioning our conversation about Sonia. The week before Susan and John's wedding, I decided to surprise Jean about our Caribbean holiday. The girls hadn't told Jean where we were going. After learning about Cheryl's hostility towards her mother, I had wired the lounge with a microphone connected to an old tape recorder in my bedroom, just to satisfy my curiosity. I often heard John mention her upcoming cruise and how she wouldn't be able to visit the kids in late June and most of July. Annette would always respond, "Daddy's taking us away for summer," without revealing where. I figured Cheryl had sworn her to secrecy. Jean repeatedly tried to convince the girls that a cruise would be better than a couple of weeks in Paynton, and wanted them to persuade me to let them go with her. Paynton had been Jean's idea of a perfect holiday, as it was where her parents took her as a child. We had vacationed there every year, and she had always refused to consider going elsewhere, especially out of the country. Jean probably assumed I'd take the girls there again, but she was shocked when she saw Tracy on cue pick up the girls' passports that I had strategically placed on the coffee table before she arrived. "Why do you need passports?" Jean asked the girls. "Don't be silly, Mom. We need them to get on the airplane," Annette replied. Cheryl seemed to know this was the day I planned to tell Jean about our trip to the Caribbean, so she didn't stop her sister from spilling the beans. "Where are you flying to?" Jean demanded. "Daddy's taking us to the Caribbean with some friends," Cheryl said with a hint of triumph. "We're staying in a big house with a pool, like Tadpole's but outside. Tadpole's going to teach us to sail and snorkel," Annette added, eager to chime in. Jean went quiet for a moment. Tracy, who was there as usual, later told me Jean looked like she'd been hit by a bus when she realized where we were going and who we were going with. "I need to speak to my husband," Jean suddenly said to Tracy. "Where is he? If you mean your ex-husband, Mrs. Amore. He's probably in the kitchen or his workshop," Tracy replied. Jean stormed into the kitchen, where she found me fiddling with an old video camera. "The girls say you're taking them to the Caribbean," she said, as if I were leading them into danger. "Yes, we've been invited to a villa by a friend. And when were you planning to tell me? You're breaking your promise." "How can I visit them if they're out there?" she demanded, sounding triumphant. I looked up slowly. "So, what was your plan, Jean? Were you going to hop off your luxury cruise a few times a week to visit? Or is it just that you can go abroad, but they can't? Or maybe you just don't like the idea of me having a nice trip for once?" "Well, no. But the Caribbean? There are sharks out there. I don't want my kids getting hurt. I promise they won't get eaten by sharks, Jean. They could have come with me on the cruise. It's safer." "They could, if you weren't going with that idiot. He's more dangerous than any shark. But even if he wasn't going, the girls would still prefer to go with their friends." "What friends?" "Superstud's kids. Annette and Cheryl are like siblings with them now." "Don't look so surprised, Jean. They have a lot in common. They've all had a parent walk out on them. I didn't walk out. You threw me out, remember? I just beat you to it, Jean. Don't pretend you weren't planning to leave me and take the kids well before I knew you were seeing that guy. You were going to take my kids from me, and don't deny it, I was getting annoyed." Jean must have sensed it and backed down. "When are you going?" she asked. "Sunday morning. We're all meeting at the airport. Are you coming to see them off? I know Superstud is coming to see his kids off." I loved seeing Jean's expression. She didn't know what to say. Susan, who later watched the video I secretly recorded, noticed it too. That evening, while Susan was getting ready for her wedding in Sonia's mansion, I showed her the tape. She watched as she delayed her entrance just enough to make Jean's life difficult. It's rare for Jean to be at a loss for words. I grinned. "I wonder what she'll think of Susan," began, then paused and changed the subject. "Think of what?" I asked. "I know my sister," she said thoughtfully. "Sonia's planning to make Seymour think there's something going on between you two. I wonder what Jean will think." "Probably nothing." "Sonia and me? That's not happening." "Jean might be clueless, but not that clueless," I said dismissively. Susan raised an eyebrow. "What's so far-fetched about you and Sonia, or even just a fling? Sonia's upper class. Just because our kids play together doesn't mean she's interested in me romantically." Susan shook her head, frustrated. "What's wrong with you? You've got more class in your little finger than Seymour ever had. Just because Jean couldn't see it doesn't mean Sonia can't." I remained skeptical. "Susan, these people love to act like everyone's equal, but they'll put you in your place if you get too close. Sonia's just using us to get back at Seymour. I'm sure she's only invited us over to get under his skin. Once she's had her fun, she'll be done with us." "You think?" Susan asked, doubt creeping into her voice. "Susan, did you see the guy who showed up here the other Sunday? That car alone costs over $250,000. That's more Sonia's type. She's got her reasons for having us around, but once the bubble bursts, I'm worried about how the girls will handle it. Cheryl's gotten really close to Dominic. Maybe I shouldn't have let it go this far," I confessed, concern evident in my tone. "But you do like Sonia, don't you?" "You fancy her," Susan pressed. I hesitated before admitting, I never said I didn't. She's beautiful, and Jean can't compare to her poise or class. Sonia always looks like she's about to walk out on a catwalk. If Seymour wanted a trophy wife, he can't knock her. I have no idea why he went after my wife. "No. I mean, do you like Sonia as a person?" Susan clarified. "Yes, of course. At least the person I've seen so far," I conceded. "But I have to believe it's all an act. I know why she's being so friendly in the first place." "You do? What's her motive?" Susan asked, genuinely curious. "To upset Seymour," I replied flatly. Susan shook her head. "I think you've become a pessimist. Can't you believe someone's just being genuine without an ulterior motive?" "Trust is a good word, Susan. I trusted Jean, remember? I married her, and after 10 years and 2 kids, she left me for that idiot and tried to take my daughters. That teaches you not to trust anyone's intentions," I said, bitterness creeping into my voice. Susan softened. "You're not the only one who's been let down by someone they loved." I looked at her, knowing her own history. "Come on, Sue. You knew your husband was into pills and booze before you married him. Everyone warned you he'd end up dependent or dead from an overdose, and now all he cares about is his next fix." "I thought I could change him," Susan said defensively. "I'm not criticizing you for marrying him. We all make mistakes. I thought Jean would never change, but she did. Maybe I was just a stepping stone until she found someone richer. That's why I'm going to be more skeptical from now on. Don't you remember what Dad always said? If it looks too good to be true, it probably isn't, I reminded her. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Can I come in? Sonia's voice called from outside. Yes, of course, Susan replied, standing up. Sonia peeked in with a grin. Susan, are you ready? Poor John's getting worried you've changed your mind. The wedding went smoothly with a small gathering. Besides us and the kids, only a few of John's co-workers and their wives and one cousin Susan and I were still in touch with attended. The rest of the invited relatives didn't show. Sonia's Uncle Theo and Lady Gilda, a cousin who I'd never heard referred to by her title before, were also there. Aunt Gilda, waiting at the bottom of the staircase, asked Susan to remove her fake pearls and gave her a diamond necklace, brooch, and bracelet worth nearly $100,000. Susan was stunned, but the jewelry perfectly complemented her dress. I'd never seen my sister look so beautiful. After the ceremony, I took Susan's youngest kids home with me while Rachel took the older two. Susan and John spent their wedding night at a hotel, and when we all met early the next morning at Susan's house, John looked exhausted and Susan was all smiles. We had to be at the airport by 9:30. Checking in for the flight was chaotic since 6 of the kids had never flown before and were extremely excited. Sonia's 3 kids, used to the routine, helped guide the others. I was surprised to see Jeremy and the 2 girls with Sonia's group, but didn't question it. They had been joining Sonia and her kids on these summer trips for years. They were good at keeping the kids occupied while we waited for our flight. Jeremy whispered to Sonia, "The lovers have arrived," as he spotted Jean and Seymour coming from the car park. "We should separate our kids from Susan's." Unfortunately, Jean and Seymour's arrival caused the 2 groups to converge. Annette ran to her mom, and Cheryl followed but stayed nonchalant. Seymour ignored his own kids to greet Annette, which annoyed me, but I bit my tongue to avoid a scene. Meanwhile, Sonia and Seymour had a heated exchange, with Seymour accusing her of infidelity. I couldn't resist confronting him after he insulted her and implied I was just a van driver. I called out his hypocrisy, mentioning that a real cheater is someone who deceives a loving spouse. Seymour took a swing at me, but I dodged and countered, landing a punch that sent him collapsing to the floor. The whole incident was caught by the press, who had appeared out of nowhere. After the altercation, Sonia apologized, saying she hadn't expected Seymour to get violent. We regrouped with the kids and moved on. Sonia kissed me briefly, our first real physical contact, and I found I enjoyed it. No one mentioned the fight during the flight to Jamaica. At the airport, Sonia was clearly well known and expected. We were treated like VIPs, and met by a giant Jamaican named Sam, who was in charge of the villa and the kids' safety. He insisted on carrying our bags, reminding me that this was his job. As we made our way to the villa, I noticed the staff unloading our luggage from another boat and carrying it up the path. A brief interruption occurred when Simone, one of the staff, ran to greet Jeremy with a hug, revealing they were a couple. Sam explained that they had been together for years and that Jeremy and his sister planned to join the villa staff after finishing their studies. They intended to teach water sports and eventually marry. Sam grabbed a couple of suitcases and headed up the path to the villa. I realized that everyone except Jeremy and Simone, who were preoccupied, had already gone ahead. I followed Sam, taking a glance back at the lovebirds on the jetty. The path led to a long staircase, and halfway up, I reached a large paved area with an impressive pool. I saw Sam ahead, climbing another set of steps leading to a massive patio in front of the villa. The place was enormous, with multiple wings on different levels that seemed to snake around the hillside. Later, I learned that the villa, though privately built, was meant to function like a hotel when the family wasn't there, renting out the wings to cover costs. Several smaller villas, which Sonia called summer houses, were scattered around the property. Susan and John were placed in one of these, giving them some privacy. The children were shown to their own suites by the staff. Each suite had several rooms and a private balcony or patio. The villa was not just impressive, it was incredible, like something out of a movie set. By the time I entered the villa, everyone had disappeared, and Sam showed me to my suite. He pointed out that Sonia's suite was next to mine, but I didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until the next day when I discovered all the children were in a different wing that I began to see some significance in the room arrangements. Jeremy was staying in the staff villa, and I assumed he and Simone were together since they were inseparable whenever she was off duty. After a quick shower, I went to find my daughters. I found them, along with Susan's kids, getting a tour of the house from Tadpole and his sisters. I had to remind them it was late, and eventually, they agreed to go to bed, still excited from the day's events. As they headed to their rooms, I wandered onto the patio. "Can I get you something, sir? Coffee or something stronger?" Sam asked, appearing out of nowhere, a habit I soon got used to. "Call me Frank. And yeah, where's the bar?" "I could use a drink," I replied. Sam led me to the bar where he mixed one of his special cocktails. We chatted for about an hour, during which Sam filled me in on the villa's history and talked a lot about Sonia's father, to whom Sam had been deeply devoted. It was clear that his devotion had transferred to Sonia after her father's passing. I don't know what time I finally went to bed, but I was abruptly awakened by Cheryl and Annette jumping on me, eager to go swimming. After breakfast, I got up, showered, put on my trunks under some shorts, and headed to the dining room, only to find everyone eating breakfast under a large canopy on the patio. Sonia greeted me in a tiny red bikini that left little to the imagination, with a chiffon sarong tied around her waist. She looked stunning. "Good morning, Frank. Did you sleep well?" she asked, smiling at me in a way I couldn't quite decipher. "Morning, Sonia. A bit hot, but I'll get used to it," I replied. She nodded and suggested, "If you close the shutters, you can turn on the air conditioning. We're trying to be environmentally friendly, so the aircon shuts off if the windows are open." After breakfast, we had some trouble convincing Susan's younger kids not to go looking for their parents. We spent the morning in the pool with the children, and I couldn't help but notice that Sonia and I kept reaching for the same beach ball, usually thrown by Tadpole. Later in the morning, I decided it was time to talk to Tadpole about his nickname. It was fine for a little kid, but he was 10 now, and it would soon be embarrassing in secondary school. I got my chance when he joined me on the balustrade where I was sitting with a drink. "You like my mother, don't you?" Dominic asked, surprising me with his directness. "Yes, Dominic. She's a very nice person," I responded. "And very beautiful," he added, not missing a beat. "Yes, she is." "I think your father was a fool," I replied, trying to gauge his reaction. Dominic ignored my comment about his father and said, "She likes you too." "Glad to hear it," I said, wondering if he was trying to play matchmaker for his mother. But I shifted the conversation. "Dominic, about your nickname Tadpole." "Yes, sir. It does get a bit." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "It sounds a little young, especially if you have a girlfriend," I teased with a smile. "Girlfriend, sir?" he asked, a bit confused. "I'm talking about Cheryl. I'm not blind. You're sweet on her, and she likes you too. Just make sure you behave yourself," I advised. He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Yes, sir. He'll try to do that." "Dominic, how about shortening Tadpole to just Tad?" I suggested. "Like the boy on that TV show?" he asked, catching on. "Exactly. It turns a silly name into a cool one," I explained. "Yes, I like that. But how do I get people to start calling me Tad?" he wondered. "Leave that to me. Just introduce yourself as Dominic or Tad and gently stop answering to Tadpole," I advised. "Thanks, Mr. Moore. I'll try," he said, grinning as he climbed down from the balustrade. Later that day, I noticed most of the children were calling him Tad, and even Sonia and the staff picked up on it quickly. I had a feeling Sonia had been watching us talk and smiled when I was the first to call him Tad while we played in the pool. That evening, I was alone on the patio, watching Jeremy and Simone in the pool below. Susan and John showed up, dressed for a swim, and after a brief conversation, they joined them in the pool. "Enjoying the view?" Sonia asked, suddenly appearing by my side. "Not exactly. Just thinking the lights down there could be dimmed a bit," I replied, glancing at the brightly lit pool. "That's easy," Sonia said, then called out, "Sam, can we get mood lighting on the pool level?" Sam appeared almost instantly, as he always did, ready to adjust the lights as requested. Sam nodded and disappeared. Seconds later, most of the pool lights dimmed, leaving just enough light for safety and visibility. Sonia explained the pool had sensors to alert if anything stayed still at the bottom too long. Sonia then took me on a tour of the property. Somewhere along the way, she took my arm. "This is my summer house," she said, leading me to the smallest one. "My father gave it to me when I was a teenager. I never let anyone else use it." Inside, the place was cozy, filled with personal items like stuffed toys and family photos. "I come here when I need to get away," Sonia added. I couldn't help but think she probably used it to recover from her husband's infidelity, though I didn't say it out loud. We wandered through the bungalow, though it wasn't exactly small except by comparison to the main villa. We ended up in the bedroom, which featured a massive round bed. I'd never seen one outside of movies. Sonia led me out to a private patio with a stunning view. "How do you like this?" she asked, revealing a hidden jacuzzi. "Fancy," I commented. "Everything here is," she replied. "Don't let it bother you. It's a bit overwhelming, honestly," I admitted. "Is that why you haven't?" she began, but then she kissed me. Before I knew it, I was holding her, and we were kissing like teenagers. Time seemed to blur until we finally pulled apart, gasping for air. "Want a drink?" Sonia asked as she walked back inside. "Sure," I said, still processing what had just happened. Sonia's supposedly private retreat had a bar stocked with my favorite rum. She poured us drinks, linking her arm with mine, like in the movies. "To us," she toasted. "To us," I echoed, unsure if that was the right response. We sipped our drinks and kissed again. Then we made our way back to the patio. "How about a soak?" she asked. "I didn't bring trunks," I replied. "Who cares?" "It's nothing I haven't seen before," she grinned. Before I could protest, Sonia had slipped out of her clothes and into the jacuzzi. I followed, and for the next hour or so, we were lost in each other. At one point, a flashing light caught Sonia's eye. "Damn," she muttered, taking a call. "Sorry, Frank. The kids are asking where we are. We better head back." When we rejoined the group on the patio, Sam gave me a knowing look. I ended up playing chess with Tad, who quickly bested me. Even in drafts, he outplayed me. We let the younger kids win at dominoes, though Tad was just as soft-hearted as me. The next day, Tad asked if I'd let him win. "If you're old enough to like my daughter, you're old enough to handle life's challenges." "I don't get it," he said. "Just don't go easy on me next time," I clarified. Later that evening, after the kids were in bed, Sonia and I found ourselves alone on the patio. The lights had gradually dimmed, leaving us in near darkness. Suddenly, Sonia was in my lap and we were kissing again. "Isn't this a bit public?" I suggested. "Let's go somewhere more private," she said. I noticed the last light over the table went out as we stepped inside. Sam, no doubt, but when we reached Sonia's suite, she kissed me goodnight and closed the door, leaving me confused. I went to my room, took a cold shower, and then stepped out onto my balcony. "Thought you'd never get here," Sonia's voice called from the balustrade. "What, you wanted privacy, right?" "It wouldn't be good for the kids to see you entering my room," she teased. "You're full of surprises," I laughed, climbing over to her side. We spent most of the night together in her room. Sam even called to warn us when the kids were up in the morning. After that, Sonia would slip into my room every night and we'd eventually move to hers. I was falling for her, despite knowing it might not last. The next month was a blur of swimming, water activities, and parties. We met all kinds of people, celebrities, politicians, even aristocrats, and some rich, handsome men who seemed interested in Sonia once her divorce was final. John and Susan had to leave after 2 weeks, but their kids stayed with us. Our planned 6-week holiday extended to 2 months. 7 weeks in, Sonia decided she wanted some alone time in her private summer house. Sonia brought up our first meeting again and kept insisting I was such a great guy. Even though I loved her, I knew deep down it couldn't last. We came from different worlds. "Come on, Sonia. You know you'll get tired of me soon," I said. "Why would you say that?" "Are you tired of me?" she asked, sounding hurt. Gilda then shared her own story, explaining how love, not status, mattered in their family. She handed me a ring, urging me to propose. I did, and Sonia accepted. Gilda then suggested we retreat to Sonia's private house until dinner. 2 weeks after returning from the Caribbean, Sonia and I got married. It was a small ceremony with just a few guests. I don't work much anymore, aside from helping around the estate. Cheryl and Annette are adjusting well to their new school, especially Cheryl, who enjoys it as long as Tad is around. Sonia had another daughter, and all 5 kids adore her. Seymour and Jean didn't last long after that. Seymour got caught up in a dodgy deal and ended up in jail. Jean, who might have been the one to report him, is now married to a newspaper editor. She visits the girls occasionally. As for me, I've settled into life as a kept man, enjoying the peace and quiet, writing and spending time with my loving wife and our baby. Life goes on. Gilda then suggested we retreat to Sonia's private house until dinner. 2 weeks after returning from the Caribbean, Sonia and I got married. It was a small ceremony with just a few guests. I don't work much anymore, aside from helping around the estate. Cheryl and Annette are adjusting well to their new school, especially Cheryl, who enjoys it as long as Tad is around. Sonia had another daughter, and all 5 kids adore her. Seymour and Jean didn't last long after that. Seymour got caught up in a dodgy deal and ended up in jail. Jean, who might have been the one to report him, is now married to a newspaper editor. She visits the girls occasionally. As for me, I've settled into life as a kept man, enjoying the peace and quiet, writing and spending time with my loving wife and our baby. Life goes on. I don't work much anymore, aside from helping around the estate. Cheryl and Annette are adjusting well to their new school, especially Cheryl, who enjoys it as long as Tad is around. Sonia had another daughter, and all 5 kids adore her. Seymour and Jean didn't last long after that. Seymour got caught up in a dodgy deal and ended up in jail. Jean, who might have been the one to report him, is now married to a newspaper editor. She visits the girls occasionally. As for me, I've settled into life as a kept man, enjoying the peace and quiet, writing, and spending time with my loving wife and our baby. Life goes on.